All right, we are live. Another episode of Monero Talk. I am pleased to announce today we have Jtgrassie on the show. Jethro Grassie, Jtgrassie on Twitter and elsewhere throughout the interwebs. He is a Monero developer. I assume among many other things. I'm not exactly sure what his background is and how much he wants to reveal today. But Jethro, if you give a quick introduction of yourself.
Hi. I call myself a developer first and foremost. That's my thing. I love software engineering. Been doing it since I was a kid, as many other software developers have. Although I don't get to do much development in my day job these days. Hence why I like doing things like coding on Monero in my free time. So yeah, that's kind of it. I haven't been developing with Monero that long, not since the very early days. But
did you start in Monero? Did you start in Bitcoin?
So I got into Bitcoin quite early on, but actually from quite a different angle, not from a coding perspective. So my day job has a lot to do with social influence, and so we use a lot of tools to basically track, or certainly then we were anyway, to track like sentiment online for brands and stuff like that. It's all rather uninteresting, but when Bitcoin started taking off, so I suppose I got into it first started getting into it when, I can't remember the year, I'm terrible with years, but I can remember the price. So it was when it was trading at about $40. I think I bought my first Bitcoin when they were like $40.
Oh, wow. That was probably like 2012 or something, maybe.
Yeah, and I kind of, I loved it from a tech perspective. So I was obviously really interested from, an internet money standpoint. But I was also interested from another angle, which was the price and what was affecting the price. So, like, I used to hang out. I still do hang out on some kind of more niche areas of the internet, should I say? And I started seeing kind of dark posts from groups of people that were basically doing pump and dumps, very early day pump and dumps. And the way that they were doing that was basically feeding stories to the media and on social channels. And I just noticed that, like, these were very coordinated as well, very coordinated kind of pump and dumps in the very early days amongst relatively small groups of people. And so I started tracking sentiment online of Bitcoin. I fed a couple of different tools, like a number of different channels, and was just watching the sentiment on Bitcoin, and was basically making trades based on the sentiment. And I kind of went from one Bitcoin to quite a lot of Bitcoin. It's nothing I'm particularly proud of. It's certainly not something that I participate in these days with ICOs and pump and dumps and all those kind of scams. But I just found it a very interesting social experiment at the time.
Are you still following and tracking the sentiment using these same tools?
No, not at all. I got very bored with it very quickly. I get bored with things very quickly. And once I'd kind of proven to myself that, oh shit, yeah, look, you can basically make money out of doing pump and dumps. I don't even think they were called pump and dumps then, but certainly there was this notion that you could affect the price of Bitcoin. And so it was interesting for a while, but trading's not my thing. I don't enjoy trading. It's not something, and getting involved in these kind of pump and dump scams isn't my thing either. So I got very bored of it very quickly and got out of Bitcoin actually, and really ignored it for a few years, just peripherally tracking it. And then I came across Monero. I saw a few posts on Bitcoin Talk.
So just to go back but the tech at the time didn't really grab you, even in Bitcoin, or just like kind of the underlying, what it was trying to do. Did you have that? I read the Satoshi white paper and I fell down the rabbit hole. Did you have that moment?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It did, but like at the time, I didn't have a huge amount of time to delve into the code base. So I was really looking at it from a high level, and as I say, I was looking at it from a social perspective early on, as opposed to like my kind of core love, which is software engineering. I didn't really get into it from a code perspective at all. So yeah, it was very, very high level, and as I say, from a social perspective. And then when I started seeing posts on Cryptonote and Monero, so some years later, so I can only go on price again. So when Monero was $60, was this time. So I don't know when that was, 2016, 2017 maybe?
Yeah, I think maybe 2016.
So something around then. Well, this time I did get hooked on from the technical side of it, because I knew some of the shortcomings of Bitcoin, particularly the transparent ledger. By this time as well, obviously there was chain analysis companies. It was rife, basically. Like a lot of the early kind of things that people were saying Bitcoin was so great for actually turned out to be a load of crap, basically. And so I started delving into Monero a lot more from a comparison standpoint, I guess. And so I was looking at the code of Monero, and that's really when I got hooked. I guess my favored languages to code in are C and C++. And although the code base of Monero isn't perfect, there's certainly areas for improvement, and obviously people are continuously improving it. I started to see things straight away that like I could jump in on, and basically with a relatively minimal amount of my own time, contribute into it, and essentially help everybody. And the first thing that I tackled, actually, which was, so I bought my first Monero at $60 using the command line tools. And one of the first things that grabbed me was the fact that that the command line tools didn't have readline, the GNU readline library implemented. So like, hitting up arrow, which was my primary use case for readline, to get to past commands that I've ran, obviously didn't work. So I tackled that first, which seemed like, on the face of it, something fairly easy to tackle. Actually, it wasn't as easy as I could have hoped. But yeah, I managed to do that, and I also had a really good experience of my first contribution as well. Monero Moo was, he's great. I mean, he has a good sense of natural, not hostility, that's the wrong word, distrust maybe, initially, but he was great, and like we started forming some kind of rapport. And also HYC, Howard Chu, I mean, he's an absolute legend, and he also got involved in some of the discussions around readline as well, and actually has helped improve it as well. So I had a very, very good experience with my first contribution to Monero, so I've kind of stuck with it. I'd love to spend a lot more time on it. Unfortunately, I have a day job. I also have a daughter, and so I don't get as much time as I'd like to. But what time I do have, I spent either contributing to the code base, which is, not very much, or doing other stuff with Monero, whether that be answering people's questions on Stack Exchange. I spent a fair bit of time recently on mining, on a mining pool, which has been really fun. And so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a show I've been wanting to do for quite some time, talking about the perfectly hiding versus computationally binding. Something that I learned about, I guess, about a year ago. I didn't really get it, and then I kind of, it became the thing that I was trying to learn about, because it seemed like Monero's biggest flaw. I mean, if you talk to any Bitcoin maximalist that's kind of in the know, that's what they'll go. If you're in a debate with them regarding Monero versus Bitcoin, it kind of ends up being the one point of contention that you really can't formulate an argument against. But I think that was because I just didn't really fully understand it. But after, I recently spoke with Andrew Polstra about it. I don't know if you saw that video. Yeah. And I got some good knowledge out of that, and I felt a lot less concerned about it after speaking with him, even though he was, arguing the kind of the normal FUD that it's a flaw in Monero. But in talking with him, I kind of realized, well, if the worry is that quantum computers can secretly, essentially create Monero, they could also, break Bitcoin's private keys, right? So it becomes, if it's an argument against Monero, it's an argument against Bitcoin. And I think you, in your recent posts, really covered it very well. And I'd like to go into detail on that. Is that something that you've been facing as well? Is that like you've been hearing about it quite a bit? I mean, what's your overall opinion on that FUD?
So, I mean, it's interesting because we kind of come at it from slightly different, but from a similar kind of angle, basically, like you're hearing. So what triggered me, I suppose, if that's the right phrase to use, was there was a particular member of the community. I won't name names, but a particular member of the community that started basically saying that because they couldn't audit the security of the commitments, because there wasn't a formal audit of the commitments, and because the commitments were perfectly hiding and only perfectly binding, and I think this is the key word, only, which is bandied around.
You mean only computationally binding?
Yeah, right. Computationally binding. So they were basically saying that there was basically potentially hidden inflation, because of the fact that because the commitments are only computationally binding, and I think that it kind of triggered me because first and foremost the using the word only in there is a kind of misdirection. The commitments are perfectly hiding and computationally binding. It's not an only. Using the word only doesn't really make any sense here. They're computationally binding, and as you say, it's not really even about Bitcoin. Like that computational binding is the underpinnings of the of all elliptic curve cryptography, which is the hardness of the elliptic curve discrete logarithm problem. That is underpinned in basically any cryptography that uses elliptic curves. Its underpinnings of its security are defined by the hardness of the elliptic curve discrete logarithm problem. So to use the word only in the phrase of computationally binding, to say it's only computationally binding kind of really does it a disservice. The side benefit of the commitments, the fact that they're perfectly hiding, is, as I see it, a side benefit. Like if the whole commitment was computationally secure, that's probably good enough. I mean, the fact that we're relying on computational hardness for other elliptic curve cryptography, I don't see the problem here. And so anybody that basically, without the understanding of that hardness, that then goes and starts basically saying that it's a weakness in Monero and that there's, you know, a hidden inflation, a possible hidden inflation, based on that phrase of perfectly hiding and computationally binding, it's kind of nonsense.
And just to kind of, so I understand it and the audience understands, the real fear though is only in a scenario where quantum computers or some other amazing computing system can break the discrete logarithm, right? I mean,
Exactly.
that's what we're talking about.
Exactly.
So it's not that there's a fear that there's hidden inflation today because we know no such computers exist today. It's this hypothetical future where such computer exists. Is that correct?
Well, it is, but this particular user that triggered me with what he was saying was basically, he was insinuating that there was already like hidden inflation, and basically we couldn't disprove it because there was no audit of the Pedersen commitments, or Peterson commitments to be more accurate. So that was what triggered me initially. It's slightly different from what maybe triggered you, because I mean, Bitcoin, you know, maybe Bitcoin maximalists, but yeah, I mean, it's total nonsense basically to say that it's some weakness in Monero, or to say that there is hidden inflation because of the fact that the commitments are only computationally binding. There's no only about it. They're computationally binding, and that's good. That's strong.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of zoom out, I mean, the real kind of fundamental argument or kind of dichotomy I'm seeing between Monero and Bitcoin is kind of this list of priorities of what you think is more important. So a Bitcoin maximalist in the Bitcoin core developer will tell you that the number one priority is security, and that's the number one priority, and that's why they're hesitant to add things like confidential transactions. Whereas in Monero, they'll tell you, well, you know, we want fungible digital cash, and then we'll worry about keeping it secure. Obviously security is important, but it's like we don't. I mean, I don't want to speak for the whole community, but I don't really see the point of such protocol if it's not digital cash in the first place. What are we securing at the end of the day if we haven't achieved digital cash? And in Bitcoin, I felt like they almost even have kind of given up on the pursuit of being digital cash and saying, well, it doesn't really need to totally be fungible. You don't need privacy on the protocol level because that's a risk, because then it may not be as secure, which I find odd because then they're sacrificing security in other places. I mean, Monero has the tail emission, which I think that's a great thing for guaranteed security in the future. We know that Monero will always be distributed and mined by miners, whereas Bitcoin seems to be taking this risk and not really knowing what the future is going to be like in terms of securing the network. So I just see a lot of contradictions there. Their argument seems to be that it's about security first, but there seems to be so many contradictions as well in that regard.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is essentially somebody taking what is essentially a weakness in Bitcoin and trying to turn that into a positive thing. That's ultimately what we're talking about. Because,
exactly.
Of course, there is no question about how much Bitcoin there is in existence. There is no question. It's completely auditable because it's all completely transparent. And what secures Monero is math. So you can completely see what's been emitted from the Coinbase transactions. So you know how much Bitcoin has ever been emitted in Coinbase transactions, but you can't disprove that there isn't some hidden inflation that basically somebody hasn't broken the discrete logarithm problem. Of course we can't, but then it's like saying, I don't know, we're reliant on math, and the math here actually isn't that complicated. And this is the other thing that really triggers me when somebody naively talks about a hidden inflation with regard to Peterson commitments. The math behind them is like grades. Oh, sorry, I'm doing my American speak now, but I don't know who I was talking to. Grade school math, basically, what I would call high school math. It's not actually hardcore cryptography. It's like anybody can look at, like anybody that can do grade school math can understand how Peterson commitments works. They're not that complicated, and so anybody that and look, I'm not a hardcore cryptographer at all. Like I've had to work like with, I discuss stuff with like people like NAC and the Monero Research Lab, and all the other Monero people that have got a far greater understanding of a lot of the cryptography than I do. And like those posts, for example, I bounced them off NAC before I published them, just to be 100% sure that there was no like holes in them. The math isn't that hard, so like the math itself is auditable. It gets a bit more complicated when you start looking at things like bulletproofs. The math there does suddenly start getting a lot harder, but we've only had those recent, that's only a recent addition. And I would say that the math in bulletproofs isn't, unauditable either. I mean, we've had it audited by, what was it, three different companies?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I mean, so the whole argument also seems to break down, right? If it's about security, then Bitcoin is really just as vulnerable as Monero is in those terms, because they both rely on this discrete logarithm not being broken, right?
Yeah, it's not just Bitcoin though. I mean, it's basically anything that uses elliptic curve cryptography. So we're talking about browser certificates, web certificates. We're talking about PGP keys. We're talking about SSH keys. We're talking about like pretty much everything that we use at the moment. We rely on elliptic curve cryptography for so much stuff right now, so much stuff. And the hardness of elliptic curve cryptography is formed on the discrete logarithm problem. So essentially, if we're in a situation where we have computers that are powerful enough to work out the discrete log, then essentially there's tons of stuff that's broken. It's not just our little project Monero. I mean, we're talking tons and tons of stuff. So, and the other point is we are some way off having computers that are powerful enough to solve this. Like the estimates that I've read on quantum computers ever, becoming, in existence to be able to do the kind of crunching that we're talking about. We're talking like estimates between kind of 20 and 40 years away. Yeah.
And obviously, in the meantime, Monero is evolving. It's not static. It's dynamic and attempting to thwart some possible future attack. And it's not just Monero; it's Bitcoin that's going to need to be able to figure that out as well. So,
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. But like, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but like, for example, there's another type of commitment called a switch commitment, which basically switches to be perfectly bound and computationally hidden.
This is Elgamal? Is this the Elgamal?
I'm not talking about Elgamal commitments. I'm talking about switch commitment, which at some point later in time will then switch. So at a point in time when the discrete logarithm problem is solvable, you can flip a switch and basically the commitments are now this other type of commitment. But again, it's a commitment. We're talking about a commitment which doesn't exist yet. We're talking about a commitment which we don't have yet because we're reliant on elliptic curve cryptography at the moment. We don't yet have quantum resistant commitments. So the whole thing is a silly argument, basically.
I just want to make sure we fully cover what, because you made some great points in your post. So we covered the fact that, you know, if this is a threat to Monero, it's kind of equally a threat to Bitcoin, if not everything else in you know, the computing world. And then you kind of got into, well, you know, it was a design choice, right, to be perfectly hiding and computationally binding. And if we could possibly choose the alternative today using, I guess, Algomal. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct.
Yeah.
Algomal commitments, which would kind of be the reverse. So you'd be perfectly binding and computationally hiding, but that would come at costs. Right. So those are I guess, much, they require a lot more computation. They're more computationally heavy. So that would come at cost there. And then you made another good point. There may be an additional reason why you wouldn't want to do that. So if you get into the two reasons as to why design choice, why it seems to make sense to use the choice we currently have, which is these Peterson commitments.
So I think, so the two key reasons why I think using Peterson commitments now makes sense. So first and foremost is privacy. There's nothing that will ever unhide the amounts in a Peterson commitment. They are perfectly hiding. Right?
And that's even if, you know, quantum computers,
exactly. Regardless what happens with quantum computing, they are perfectly hiding. That's just the fact. So regardless of what computational power we ever have in the future, we will never be able to unhide the amounts in the Peterson commitments. It's just not feasible. So no amount of math can get around that. So, which brings us on to another point, which is the size of the Peterson commitments. So if we started using Elgamal commitments, we're essentially double the size of the commitments which get used in the transaction. And so we are going to create much bigger transactions straight away. So given that we've already identified that the strength of the computational binding is considered strong, all other elliptic curve cryptography basically is underpinned by this strength, and that we want small, fast commitments that are hidden as well. If at some point in the future we start seeing that, you know, quantum computers are getting to a point where they may be able to break the discrete logarithm problem, well, we've got an option to switch, and we can switch without ever unhiding any of the past amounts. The amounts will stay hidden for forever. So I think that is the trade-off that we make, essentially. Now, we could go the other way around. We could say that we want to have perfectly bound commitments, but only computationally hidden. Well, the downside to there is as I said, we've got a larger commitment, so our transactions get bloated, our blockchain gets bloated. All the work that we've been doing to constantly make our transactions smaller and our blockchain use up less disk space just gets blown out of the water because there's a lot of commitments in the transaction. So we'd have heavy transactions, and we still don't have a problem solved. In fact, if anything, we actually create a weakness. And that weakness being that at some point in time, all amounts conceivably or likely will be at some point in the future when we've got powerful enough computers, all those amounts will be unhidden. And there's nothing we can do about that. They will become unhidden permanently. So I think the trade-off here is we've got time on our side. Everybody's got time on their side regarding elliptic curve cryptography for when quantum computers start becoming powerful enough to solve the problem. And we can solve the problem as it's coming along. We don't need to solve it now.
I'm convinced.
I'm not the best person at explaining this either.
No, I do appreciate those posts. I think it's kind of about time we kind of dispel that FUD. I'm not saying Monero is perfect by any means. You know, we all realize it's kind of it's a work in progress, like any of these cryptos. But that always seems to be the kind of the argument that could never be won against the Bitcoin maximalists, and it's really just kind of absurd because it applies to them as well. If you
everybody that uses elliptic curve cryptography,
right?
So
what if we zoom out though, or just so we're talking about the worry of secret inflation, given the fact that we're perfectly blinding and computationally binding. But what if we just wanted to audit the chain today? I mean, that needs to be understood as well, right? I mean, there is the chain is auditable, correct? I mean, by verifying inputs and equating them to outputs, right? I mean, isn't there ways that's done in Monero today as well?
We can only audit in terms of the math. What we can't do, because the amounts aren't shown, what we can't do, like Bitcoin, is prove for a fact that there is no inflation. That's obviously, we can't. We can only prove it insofar as the math is solid. And so all we can do is audit the math. We can audit the math and we can audit the chain based on that math. We can verify that the sum of all inputs minus the sum of all outputs doesn't create money.
Right.
But again, that's using math. It's not looking at some transparent ledger. So the math has to be solid. There has to be no mistakes in the math, and that can be audited, and it is audited, like our bulletproof audits.
Right, but as long as the math is correct, then it's very secure in knowing that it's audited when you can measure the sum of the inputs versus some of the outputs, and
exactly,
it's not some voodoo science here. It's very straightforward as long as the math that's used to do it is correct.
Yeah, exactly. If the math is correct and you run the math over every transaction on the blockchain, and then you can prove, based on the fact that the math is correct, that there's no hidden inflation. But of course, it's not quite the same thing as like I said with Bitcoin, where it's completely transparent. You don't even need to run the math on it. That's the point. You literally, because the values are there to be seen, there is no reliance on the math. And I think this is what kind of triggered me with this particular individual. Because they didn't understand the math. Perhaps they didn't do math at grade school. I don't know. Perhaps they haven't looked at the simplicity of the math in the Peterson commitments. Even the old range proofs were easy to understand. I mean, bulletproofs, admittedly, for somebody that isn't a cryptographer, I still couldn't say that I got my head around them. But I trust that they've been audited by independent third parties. So, like, not understanding the math, it's easy to say, oh, it's not auditable. Because if you don't trust the math, then you don't have the trust. It's as simple as that. if you can trust that 2 + 2 = 4, then, and you understand 2 + 2 = 4, great. And obviously that's a simple math. Like the math involved with a Peterson commitment is slightly more advanced than that. It's like, you know, high school grade math. But if you can trust that simple math, then it's cool. And also, I suppose the other thing is you still are trusting that the elliptic curve discrete logarithm problem is hard. We're all trusting that. That's
right.
one thing we all have to do. We're all trusting that in all of our cryptography. Of course, there's a possibility that some secret government agency's got some supercomputer that none of us know about that can break the LP, but.
Right, but then everybody's exposed to that risk.
Exactly.
So what is your overall? I mean, we kind of tried to get into this in the beginning of the conversation a little bit. You came into Bitcoin, then you played around with Bitcoin a little bit. You left, you came back, you got into Monero. But what is your overall kind of take on this concept of the fact that we're here, we're trying to invent digital cash? Do you have an opinion there? Do you think it's about digital cash? Do you think it's about something else? Are you just here for the code?
No, I actually, I very much am into it from the digital cash perspective. Like, although I don't really like the term digital cash. I don't think.
Yeah, if you have a better way of explaining it, I mean that's really what I've arrived upon.
I like the notion of improving something, and ultimately Monero as a form of money, I think greatly improves upon all other types of money that exist today. I think it's better than cash because it's more advanced than cash. Like cash it's old and difficult. We've got to print the bloody stuff, and like there's central bodies in control of it. It's got all sorts of flaws. So I think Monero and other currencies like it that are trying to basically be that that digital cash, I think is a great improvement on everything else that exists. And I'm also incredibly disheartened by what's happened with Bitcoin over the years. In regards to the fact that there was this original, if you go right back to the beginning, back to the white paper, there was this notion of creating a digital cash. Yet it's got some fundamental flaws in it that nobody's ever really addressed, and it seems like they never will, to be quite honest.
I mean, what do you see as the flaws?
I mean, the transparency, first and foremost. The fact that you can trace it means it's not cash. It doesn't act like cash. It's not fungible. I think, when you're talking about fungibility and traceability, for me, I think the most important aspect of this is that you can censor it. This notion that maybe I, as a merchant, receive Bitcoin from somebody, but then I can't use it anywhere because maybe that Bitcoin has been tracked as being involved in some illegal activity. So nobody wants to touch it, which means that I'm holding Bitcoin, but I can't use it. And that defeats the whole purpose of cash.
Yeah.
So it's more than just about personal privacy, which I also do value greatly as well. But fungibility is like such an important part of Bitcoin that it's completely missing. And I will not be surprised if in years to come, when, as I assume, Bitcoin will never add fungibility to it, there will be a point where there are essentially what I call tainted Bitcoins, which nobody can use.
Do you think? I mean, yeah, the way For me, I mean, obviously that's the way I look at it as well. I see fungibility as being kind of the an essential ingredient to what this stuff needs to have. Privacy is kind of a side effect of it, and it's nice. It's a nice to have thing that comes with being fungible.
I think
But
it's equally important, though. I would
yeah,
add. I think
definitely equally important. But I kind of just look at it as kind of like on a if we're looking at this as a protocol for transferring value, I feel like the
yeah,
most efficient one, the one that's going to win, is the one that's most fluid, and that's where every unit equals every other unit, and that creates kind of this fluid protocol for value transfer where kind of nothing can be stopped or censored, and it just will allow for the kind of the free flow of information in terms of value.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I can't disagree with that, and I think these are reasons, particularly why Bitcoin's very disheartening. Um, I think it's going to have its use cases. Well, it obviously has. I think, but I don't think it's any great improvement on anything else. I think that's the bottom line. I mean, it has minor improvements, but it fundamentally fails because of the fungibility problem.
So seeing that we completely, retorted against the perfectly hiding and computationally binding argument, what do you think are some of the other major arguments against Monero, versus something like Bitcoin that maybe are valid or aren't valid, but that are kind of running through the
Yeah.
back of your mind?
So I don't like this question. I don't like it because there is one thing that I think is like so far has been one of the biggest pain points. I think is newcomers. I think it is difficult. I see for people to start using Monero straight away, even for people that are long used to using other cryptocurrencies. It's a fact. So none of us can ignore it. It is harder to get started with Monero than anything else. And I say this because I've got a really one of my best friends who's been a friend since we were kids. I got him into Monero a couple of years ago, and he's been quite into the cryptocurrency space for some time as well. And he's not what I would call a computer illiterate either. I mean, he's a smart guy, and he's not a programmer, but he's a smart guy. He uses a computer. He does video editing. There's all sorts. He's a smart guy, and he had all sorts of trouble with Monero. Like we're talking from like downloading the thing to installing it on Windows, getting antivirus pop-ups, to like having to wait and download the entire blockchain. Like the different ways that you can use it. You don't even need to download the whole blockchain. You could use it, you can use a remote node, but then you've got to explain the privacy implications of using a remote node. And like the level of education is it's a lot. It's a lot to take in for newbies. And I think that like there's a lot of people that are doing a lot, that there is a continuous amount of work trying to improve it for people. And we shouldn't take anything, and I'm not taking anything away from all of the people that are doing, huge amounts of work, for example, on the GUI wallet, which is, I think it's fantastic. I mean, it's amazing considering what it does. But it still doesn't solve that like anybody can use it. Like Bitcoin, literally anybody can download any number of Bitcoin wallets and start using it very, very quickly.
Well, I mean, I think the phone app, for me, the big breakthrough was when Cake came out and made the iOS wallet.
Yeah.
And then My Monero released, which My Monero is super slick. I mean, as well, it's Have you used either of
Yeah,
the, I'm sure you've used
yeah.
both of those.
I've used all of them.
And then Moneruju. So I mean, it's at the point where it's as simple as downloading an app on your phone. Um, you know, Cake,
Well,
it's a little cumbersome because you got to wait for things to download, but that's because it's you're
but that
you're
depends on your
you're
threat
holding your own
model, though.
keys and all those things.
But
But
that depends on your threat model. Like it's like, yes, I could recommend to somebody that basically wants to just start trying out Monero and isn't doing any transactions which they need to be private. So let's say a friend in a country that has got an oppressive regime. Um, like there are situations where like so back to my example of my friend, I pushed him into like essentially using the full wallet, not the command line, because I know that he's not he's not a command line user, but he's more than capable enough of understanding the GUI wallet. But like as I say, that learning curve to get to using Monero in what I would call its most sensible state to use it, which is using your own node. Yeah, the My Monero is fantastic and Kate Wallet's great, but they have their drawbacks in that you are trusting a third party to some degree.
Yeah, I don't know. I think at that point. I mean, even me being a pretty big idealist, I feel like, especially with Cake, because you're holding your own keys. At that point, it's really no different than Bitcoin. I mean, so do you not use? Would you not recommend somebody to use a Bitcoin wallet on their phone either, like a Bread wallet or something? Is that?
As I say, I don't think it's about not recommending it. I think it's a case of I wouldn't recommend somebody use any wallet that's using like third-party services if it's important that their transactions remain private. If as soon as you're using a third-party node, a remote node, of course you're risking your privacy.
Okay, for the nodes, yeah.
As I say, like I think, yeah, and so my point is, I'm not taking anything away from the wallets like Cake Wallet or Monero. I think they're fantastic, and I think Vic's great and Endogenic's great. What they're doing for the community is fantastic with these wallets, and they are great for recommending to somebody that's just wanting to just play with Monero, let's say, or they're wanting to do transactions, and they're not hugely worried about creating the most secure private transactions. Absolutely, I would 100% recommend them. But I think ultimately, I think for Monero to you asked me what I see as one of the negatives. And I think one of the negatives is I think it would be fantastic if out of the can, the core wallets, so the core GUI and the command line tools were like noddy simple to use. So it was literally a case of, there's no problem. Even today, there's like little bugs with the CLI. I mean, there's constantly bugs being fixed. It's just the nature of it. And but I think, and there's a lot of work that's gone into improving the performance. So, for example, all the work that's been done on pruning is fantastic. The resources required for running your own full node wallet are drastically reduced once the pruning gets released in the coming weeks. There's other stuff as well, like with I2P when that becomes more integrated with Monero. Again, we're adding another layer of privacy without people having to worry too much about like setting up I2P or Tor or whatever. Like the more we can make it like out of the can, simple to use for newbies, the better it will be, I think.
Oh, 100%. So do you think there's some kind of fundamental, fundamental things that may prevent us from getting there, or it's just
Yeah.
kind of a matter of time and putting in the effort and
I
enough
think
people paying attention to it?
it's definitely the latter. I mean, it is just time. I mean, it's like the more developers that we have that are helping, the better it will be. Like I could count on my hand the amount of people that are working full time. Actually, I can count on half of my hand the people that are working full time on the code base. There isn't. We don't have the benefit of some dev fund, basically, a secret mind dev fund or anything like that. We're reliant on the community to fund any full-time developers. And I think that we've really only got one full-time developer paid to work on the Monero core proper, that being Monero Moo. Not that this is a required thing either, like that we fund tens of developers, but I'm saying that I think to improve just requires time and development, basically. And so the more people that contribute, the more effective we can improve the code. Yeah, there's no silver bullets, but time.
All right. Anything else actually, I guess one other question back to, just to jump back for 1 second. We talked about using Peterson versus the Algomal, but is there potentially some other perfect solution where you're perfectly binding and perfectly hiding as well?
No, there's simple answers to that. Like you like mathematically can't have both. So
I just want to hear from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, no, you mathematically can't have both. So yeah.
And then real quick, you touched on the I2P. Are you involved in that as well? I think we had chatted a little bit about, or is that something that you're...
I mean, loosely, riding off the coattails of others, I would say. VT Nerd Lee did a great did a commit to basically create a tighter integration with Tor with Monero. And I then extended the work that he did to basically allow that to work with I2P. At the same time, NAC had basically found a way of taking the Java I2P and wrapping that as a standalone runtime without requiring Java be installed, using a more recent Java technology, J modules and JLink. And this was really, actually, this is worth talking about. I mean, this is such a really important aspect of like the evolution of I2P and Monero. So as you know, we had funded the development of Covery, which seemed to grind to a halt, and there was lots of us that were and still are very eager to have I2P integration in Monero. And, at some point that being like a default, essentially. So, somebody downloads the Monero wallet, the official wallet, it by default operates over I2P or Tor, basically, a hidden network instead of over ClearNet. That's an ambition that certainly many of us would love to see happen. One of the key problems was with I2P. The core work of I2P is in the Java implementation of it, and I don't really want to rehash a lot of like how it got to this point, but basically it got to a point where NAC was very much wanting to make use of the Java I2P code. It's the most actively developed. It's it's essentially the reference implementation. It's the most used implementation. And so finding a way of taking that existing code and wrapping it in such a way that it could be at some point parceled along with Monero is a fantastic achievement that he managed to do there. And it's fantastic. I2P0 is it's very lightweight. It's completely self-contained, and so I basically spent some time helping Knack in whatever way I could. So some of that was some scripts. Some of that was just discussing with him on how we would implement the integration with Monero. And actually spent, a lot of time with him and testing and helping fix scripts and stuff like that. And as I say, then riding off Lee's coattails with his tour work to deal with the Monero side of it. And I think, when we get this our next release of Monero in the coming days, weeks, whatever it is now, I don't know. Very soon. Hopefully, there's going to be a lot more people that start using I2P and Tor, using this integration, basically.
So, at what point do you think it will be kind of like seamlessly integrated, and essentially everybody will be using it?
So, I think getting it actually seamlessly integrated with the Monero code base is obviously going to require a lot of people to agree on, what I2P implementation gets included, etc., etc., etc. There's lots of different ways it can be done. There's also other work being done right now on Tiny2P, which is another I2P implementation. So I don't want to preempt everybody else's opinion on how we should move forward. I think why I'm so happy about the latest code that's gone into Monero from VT Nerd and myself is that we now at least have a way where that integration is starting to be how we need it. Basically, we need that easy integration of that layer, the I2P and/or Tor layer, and the Monero code base. And the way that's done at the moment is, using the SOX proxy, so transactions can be broadcast over I2P, but you can, optionally sync blocks over ClearNet, or you can sync them over I2P. Well, when I say I2P, I mean I2P or Tor. The integration allows either to be used, either or both even. So I think we've hit a major milestone. Is my point. I think this is a major milestone towards a larger I2P / Tor and Monero integration.
All right. Yeah. No, I'm trying to follow that as closely as I can. Got a little lost with the Covry thing. I know that was kind of the original go at it, and then there was some drama there. But I'm glad we're still chugging away and trying to come up with an alternative solution.
I think one of the nice things, if we can say that's come out of that whole debacle, is that I think there is now a tighter kind of knit group of people that are working loosely together on furthering the goals of making use of a privacy overlay network, whether that be Tor or I2P. As I said, we've got a couple of different implementations of I2P now, so we've got Tiny2P, which is at its infancy at this stage, but looks promising. We've got I2P0, which is usable right now. We've got the integration at the Monero end for Tor and I2P. There's also other work that I know is being done by Lee on I don't want to speak for him, but there's some other interesting things that he's working on, I know, as well. I think we've now got a small group of people that are working much more collaboratively together on this, whereas I think before there was a little bit of hostility, but certainly between Kovri and the original I2P guys. There was a lot of hostility, and another implementation of I2P. Bridges were almost completely burnt, I would say, and I think NAC particularly has managed to form what I would call a much more fruitful relationship with the I2P developers now as well. So
it's interesting, the human element in not just in Monero, obviously in Bitcoin and crypto in general. It's constantly coming into play here. It's the tech seems to be the easy part.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. You're right. I mean, there is that human element that I think is important. I mean, we're talking about, we want to have good relations with people that are working on other projects, doing other cool shit, basically.
Right.
So,
but it's coming together. So are you going to, speaking of the human element and getting together, are you coming to Denver to the MoneroCon?
Yes, I am. I'm slated to do a talk at the MoneroCon.
Oh, you are? That's
yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Can you reveal what its kind of general topic?
Yes, about mining.
Okay.
Which maybe is not a surprise to some, given the amount of time I've put into my mining pool implementation.
Yeah, I feel that we didn't even really talk about that today, but that's all right. We'll save it for the talk.
Yeah, and, I'm not particularly talking about that implementation. It's more mining in general. But yeah, no, I'm really excited about this conference. Actually, it's a great opportunity for anybody who's not booked a ticket yet. I would strongly recommend doing so. There's going to be a lot of Monero developers there. It's not going to be some like a lot of the conference circuit at the moment in the cryptocurrency community. There's going to be no ICOs pitching their latest token. This is essentially it's our conference.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. It's going to be, it's a very intimate affair too. I think only 300 people max, not even, that are going to be there. So, it's, if I was a Monero person, I would certainly make my way over to Denver.
Yeah, I mean, we've got such a great crew of people going. I mean, everybody that I know in the Monero developer community, tons of them are coming. There's I'm looking forward to it. And I don't particularly like conferences. I'm really looking forward to this one, and catching up with a lot of the other Monero developers there.
Very cool. I don't know if you saw on Friday. Are you going to get into town early? Are you going to get into town?
Yeah, I'll be in town early. Yeah, I saw you set up a little shindig.
Casa de Monero. So it was, success in New York. So we're taking it on the road.
Great.
So we'll have Casa de Monero. Ideas to get as many people as we can from the conference over there. So it'd be great to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
All right, Matt. Thank you so much for doing the show. I know you're a little hesitant, not wanting to kind of be in the limelight over here, but I appreciate it. I know the community certainly appreciates it. And once again, this was kind of a topic that I've been waiting to really tackle. So thanks for offering all your knowledge on it.
I hope I answered some of it.
You definitely did, and anybody who's listening, I recommend you to go, read the articles. I posted them as well, that you published on it. Thank you, Jethro.
Cool. Well, pleasure speaking to you again.
You too. Be in touch.
Take care, buddy. Bye.